How's it going? Welcome to Stories and Scribes of a Market Town. I'm Aindrias Stack and we're here in Ennistymon, and over the next few minutes we're going to be looking at the various poets, bards, scribes and scholars that have been influential in writing and literature from this market town. We're just here outside the Falls Hotel in Ennistymon, an iconic building which has huge association with literature in the town, not least for Nicola Devasse, who was Nicola McNamara from this house, but also Francis McNamara was a poet and writer. But of course, inside the doors of the Falls Hotel is the Dylan Thomas Bar. Of course, Dylan Thomas married Kathleen McNamara from this house. Although, rumour around the town has it that Dylan Thomas himself may have never come to Ennistymon at all. They say that Kathleen McNamara had so many fine strapping boyfriends around the town that she would have been shy to bring the timid little poet Dylan Thomas all the way from Wales to Ennistymon. So he may never have come, but nonetheless we have the Dylan Thomas Bar, and of course his work is well celebrated around here. Now, what's most interesting though is, of course, as I said, Nicola Devasse. So she would have been Nicolette McNamara, a sister of Kathleen McNamara, who wrote the book Two Flamboyant Fathers. And in it is so much great stories, not just about Francis McNamara himself, but also about her adopted father, Augustus John, and the crazy kind of, for the time, exploits of those families they had. She talks about when they were growing up here, and it actually starts, and it talks about the rook shoot, and she talks, the first paragraph is called about owls, and so many references to right here, this river, these trees. She talks about Henry V, who would be Henry V and McNamara, the big landlord in this house, and the shooting the rooks in those trees, and some great references. But also there is one of Francis's poems here. So it's To a River by Francis McNamara. River, no hedges full of hedge life meet your margins to your waters swimmingly. No lawns slope down, nor flowering places neat. No hills describe your passage to the sea. Yet if you are severe, your frowns mean not deadness of soul, nor prejudice declare this larkful marsh from only loving got the unrelenting mean which few find fair. In each brown patch of rush and music waits, which at the nod of spring shall gush between the earth and heaven, mix them melting hates, in love making single love seem mean. Oh, when such song is making this marsh, keep me from tenderness, make me harsh. That was To a River, about the Ennistymon River here, published in 1909 from Marionettes by Francis McNamara from this house. And more great stuff there in Two Flamboyant Fathers by Nicola Devasse. I have a great audience here with me today. I'm here outside Salmon Bookshop and Literary Centre, which is home to Salmon Press Publishing, the first major publishing house outside Dublin to primarily publish female Irish poets. So I'm here now out the back of the Salmon Bookshop, which I said publishes, has been publishing Irish and international poetry since 1981. And one of the most well-known poets that we like here is Rita Ann Higgins. So I'm just going to read quickly one of her pieces called Old Soldier from her collection, Witch in the Bushes by Rita Ann Higgins. Old Soldier. He stood at the top of Shop Street, cursing De Valera, and he muttered something about the blue shirts. When he saw Mrs. Flanagan, he said, "You could have got worse than me, but you wanted a fisherman, didn't you?" "I wasn't always like this," he said, and his veins broke, and he died alone, but not lonely. For many's the revolution he fought in his scullery with his newspaper and his fine words. Brilliant. And now, Eleanor, who works here at the Bookshop, a well-known poet, playwright, and many things, is here herself. Eleanor, you're going to read for us?
Yes, I'm going to read, will I read one of Rachel's first and then one of my own?
Do indeed. Eleanor's going to read Rachel Coventry's work from Rachel's latest and greatest, Afternoon Drinking in the Jolly Butchers by Rachel Coventry.
Also a Salmon poet. Undressing. The women of history tried on many ontologies, discarding each, piece by piece, on the back of a bedroom chair, empty as silk. Men never realized this. All they wanted was to rip buttons, laces, and zips so they could see the lie of the land.
Brilliant. That's a great little piece from Rachel Coventry's latest collection.
And will I,
Yeah. Do
or
another.
do you?
Yeah,
Okay.
you might read one of your own, Ellie.
I'll read one of my own, a work in progress. And it concerns the use of the Irish language.
Sumul.
Reading on the Lewis. You sit beside me on the Lewis. You ask, what's the book? I glance sideways. Travels with Charlie. You smile. I tell you it was written in 1962, but could have been written last week. You nod, satisfied. You are very old, but well put together. I imagine you have a wife who makes sure you have shiny shoes, well-pressed trousers, safe, secure, open to strangers on the tram. People listen to us, curious. We, a Beckett short. The train sliding silently along. Stations announced in Gaelic. A cool, detached, middle-class voice, embarrassed to admit to the double Irish consciousness. Nothing like the sounds of Connemara. Ranelagh. Ranelagh. West Brit Dublin with a smatter of Gaelic. Neither fish nor fowl, far from it we were reared. Split into those who know, those who don't. Sure, the Irish was bet into us, you say. But don't forget, you sneering Amadan, first it was beaten out of your granny. Sighing into the station, doors glide open, you rise, politely bow. The conversation in my head between my two selves silenced. I nod and watch you smiling into your happy life.
Great.
Thank you.
Right, Ellie. One of your own. And I'm just going to finish with one from Rita Ann Higgins. It's called Seal the Freezers. And it's from Rita Ann Higgins' Pathogens, I Love Patsy, Pandemic and Other Poems, aptly titled. And it's also published by Salmon Poetry. Try to come to terms with the fact that flat 7-Up won't kill the virus. Never mind sealing the borders. Seal the freezers that are chock-a-block with white sliced pan. The same tasty stalwart, when toasted and assaulted with loads of real butter, will end up filling you with more wind than a thoroughbred at Cheltenham. Tell the kids who are selling lines to F off through the letterbox. If you can say it in Irish, it takes the harm out of it. Tell them that you don't believe them about the first prize. A part of a goat will be faxed to someone in Antarctica. Take positive action. Enroll in a night class on hand washing. Duration 10 weeks, no refund. But those carrying their own sink will get priority. So I'm just going to finish with one for Jessie Lendenny, who is the editor and publisher here at Salmon Press. And wild. Years I spent looking for wilderness, searching. Does that even make sense? And where is it when you find it? That wildness. On the other side of the highway, across the stretch of a meadow, the top of that mountain. Would you cross a river to get there? A lake, an ocean? Go into the deep trees where the worn path fails? It's that kind of wild thinking, or just another striving. Would I really walk into those dark woods and call out the wild? Maybe live, maybe die. And that's it from Salmon Bookshop here in Ennistymon. When talking about storytelling in this area, you have to mention Laura Stefan O'Hillera, a great storyteller from over the road between here and Doolin over in Luke. And what's amazing about this collection is it was collected by Delargy, Seamus O'Delarga. Back in the 30s, Delargy was going around Ireland collecting stories. At that time, Clare was very inaccessible, particularly Northwest Clare. And suddenly he came, I think maybe on the West Clare Railway, and with an ass and cart they got the Ediphone, which was a big wax kind of recording device. They were recorded on wax cylinders. And he was recording various people and various music and storytelling over in Doolin. And at the very end of the night, Stefan O'Hillera told a story. And the way he told it was so clear and so croon, so attention to detail, that Delargy knew this was special. So he came back again to record Stefan and recorded a full collection of stories. And it was known as an 11th hour chronicle, and that they had got something in Stefan which was almost from another world. Stories, some of which you'd never heard before, other stories which had appeared in folktales in Egypt and Greece, other stories which resonated with folktales in Northern Europe, in parts of Norway and Scandinavia. So this collection, Laura Stefana Hilra, has mainly Stefan's, but also other storytellers like the Careys, people in Fenor, Sherlocks, various other storytellers and people who were passing through the area at the time. And it remains to be not just one of the greatest collections of folktales in Ireland, but one of the greatest collection of folktales in Europe. Will I say that again? One of the greatest collections of folktales in Europe. And these stories are all in Irish, and they're still being told today, some in English, some in Irish. Like, for example, Madra Dubh na Nocht Gus, which is often mistranslated as the black dog of the forest. And Conal Gulbán, which exists as a big story in Cork and Kerry and in other Gaeltacht areas. And very Shacht Schleift in the north, the Seven Hills of Gold. So many great stories in here, and as well to be remembered. And there's great work being done in Doolin in engaging with this book at the moment. We're just here outside Wall's house, the home of Joe Wall and Steve Wall, where they go up. It's stunning. How's it going? Great crack here today. And anyone who grew up in Ireland in the 90s will remember, of course, Brewing Up a Storm, one of their biggest hits. And they've had other great songs like Frank the Tramp and Town for Sale, which are influenced by their Ennistymon. And I'm just going to read a bit now from Brewing Up a Storm. Honey, if the truth hurts, don't look, it might go away. Easy to pretend that life is a rosy bouquet. I don't need a platter, I'll take it straight from the shelf. Give it to me raw, I'll take it home and cook it myself. So you can hear the bounce and the magic in those lyrics there from the stunning Joe Wall and Steve Wall. Now, as I said, we're only scratching the surface here. If we get into songs and ballads and music, it's a whole other kettle of fish. But one other song that might be worth mentioning is written by Tyga Hearn, is Ennistymon on the Aina by Enda Hearn. And Enda Hearn's new CD is coming out later this year. We're just here at a mural at the back of Stack's Corner by Jamie Stack. And what's interesting about it is you see a lot of references to folk tales and folk stories around the area, as well as the lovely mural and the reference to John Holland, who invented the submarine, but also Kilstafine. Kilstafine is a legendary sunken village out there in Liscannor Bay. And it's mentioned not only in the Clare Folktales by Ruth Marshall, but also in the first few pages of Two Flamboyant Fathers by Nicola Devas. She also talks about the legend of Kilstafine. So there's some great references to folktales and folklore and writing there. We're here in Stack's Corner in Ennistymon, where my father Eddie Stack grew up. This used to be my grandparents' pub, Jimmy and Monzie Stack. It was a bar. I worked behind the bar here myself once or twice, and it's still in the family, and it is now being used for Irish hand weaves, and thanks to Jean the Weaver for letting us use here today. So as I said, Eddie Stack, my father, grew up here, and some of his stories, particularly his first collection, The West, bears not only the mark of the town of Ennistymon, but also many of the stories you can kind of tell someone who grew up in a pub. Of course, Ennistymon is so famous for having so many pubs. You know, they say everyone from Ennistymon has a pub somewhere in their background, and you can tell that in some of the stories. But one story that a lot of people around here have kind of mentioned to me that resonates well with them is Limbo, which is a story that starts off about the Christian Brothers School where my father went to school, just up around the corner there at the end of Parliament Street. So I'll find that now on page 33. Limbo. Sounds from the town seeped through the tall monastery windows and mingled with the Hail Mary, the whine of the sawmill, milk churns rattling home from the creamery, horse carts creaking, motor cars honking, people hailing each other. An assurance that there was another world out there after school. Someday the monastery would be only a memory, but for now we were having a prayer break with brother Man. Back at class he resumes the tirade, prancing around the room like Groucho Marx. Man, he hears the little rattle as he passes and writes pills on the cover of his grammar book. I make a check mark with my finger. Brother was back on the pills, all right. It was written all over the monastery. The trouble with ye is that ye don't want to learn. He fumed. No, it isn't the lack of brains that's affecting ye, and I'm saying that in plain English, so you'll understand me. No, ye have brains, all right, but it's as lazy as sin. And the story goes on like that, kind of harnessing, you know, the memories and the energy of what it was like to be attending the CBS back in the days. So that's a great story from the West. Another one from that collection that kind of is The Warrior Carty on page 83. So let me find that one now. And as I was reading that, I just remembered that Eddie Stack has actually recorded these on audio with Martin Hayes, the fiddle player from East Clare, and they're available on a CD, just simply called The West, Eddie Stack and Martin Hayes. And the books are available around here in both bookshops in Ennistymon and around the place, and I think the CDs are available as well. So just do the Warrior Carty now. The Warrior Carty. The warrior had enough of the Christmas fair and took cover in Looney's bar. It was empty, dark and cold, still waiting to be strobed by the solstice sun. A harmless old fare, sniffled Bridgie, totting up his bill in a brown paper bag. 4 shillings for the powers and 3 and 6pence for the bottle of porter. What's that altogether? 7 and 6, Bridgie, said the warrior, leaving 3 half-crowns on the red formica counter. He settled them into a small pile. Thanks, Bridgie, and good luck to you all. And the same to yourself. They have the country round, and everything is so dear, sir. They have this poor country shagged, Bridgie, and that's about the size of it now. 'Tis true of you. And what's more, the crowd that's doing it never fire a singing shot in their life. 'Tis true of you. Anyways, sighed the warrior, flopping his arms in resignation. Give us another small whiskey. Powers, wasn't it? Power it is. And that's the way I know, Bridgie. What kind of a Christmas are you having so far? Here it is quiet. You know yourself. And sure, today is the big day, and can't you see the way it is? Quiet, sure. You might rise a stirring it yourself in the square later on. Not today, Bridgie. No, not today, Bridgie, the warrior repeated, shaking his head. But anyways, this is the overcoat I was telling you about the last day I was here. She admired the dark Crombie coat and listened to how he came upon it. And he was wearing the good blue suit, clean shirt, collar and tie. These he bought from the Pakistani hawker who came to Ennis every Saturday. That was another story, better left for another day, he said. So, as you can see, that story based in a pub, not unlike the pub that was here and the many pubs around the town. He also has Out of the Blue, short stories, and Quairhawks. And they all have good old stories in them. Some of them, particularly the first book, has a good old bang of Ennistymon on some of the short stories. And also worth mentioning is the Doolin book, People, Place and Culture. So my father, Eddie Stack, wrote this book about, based kind of on some of the conversations, tape recordings and stories that he collected in the North Clare area in the 70s, 80s and 90s. And like a lot of the other books mentioned on our little tour today, these books are available in both of the bookshops here in Ennistymon. One can't really talk about the storytelling, the Shanachas, the Bardic tradition in this area without, of course, referring to the Clan Crutheen, the McCurtains or the curtains in this area. And there's a great piece by Luke McInerney called The Origins of Clan Crutheen, Chronicle Poets of the Learned Gaelic Tradition. Clan Crutheen were amongst the most noble, learned kindreds in County Clare in the late medieval period. They featured among the Aishdána, the Gaelic learned class who specialised in the Annals Assert, Shanachas agus le Shannon. Shanachas, of course, come from Shanachie, the old way, the old stories, and the Shannon was the music. Holding hereditary lands in West County Clare on the margins of the Atlantic coast, they attained the status of Olafnocht in history. Olaf is a professor, so Olafnocht would be high learning or academia. Olafnocht in history. Shanachas is again history, music, Shannon, from the 14th century. Remarkably, learned members of the Clan Crutheen continued to be associated with literary activity in the native tradition until the mid-19th century, when the Seamus McCurtain, self-described as the last relic of the hereditary bards of Thomond, died. So from the 14th century to the 19th century. So that's a fair stretch. And I suppose what I've kind of got from this is that way back in the 12th, 13th, 14th century, and long before that, the kings and the tribes leaders had bards, and thus that bardic tradition was handed down within families, and as it says, those families may have had hereditary lands. So it was like a lot of other jobs, it was handed down from family to family to family over generations, and they continue to have lands. So I think that the McCrutheens may have been bards to the Earls of Thomond, or at some point to the O'Briens, the O'Connors, the noble big tribes like that. And what's really interesting is there may have been a school of poetry in West Clare. So I'll just read that out a bit now here. Much attention has been paid to the poetry of Aindrias and Abbey McCrutheen by modern writers, while it is generally agreed that the family's flowering of poetry and literary renown was chiefly embodied in the work of these two poets. The physical remains of a schoolhouse, Scoilcha, where members of Clan Clutin cultivated their professional specializations of history and music has not been identified. So it hasn't been found exactly where it was, but it is quite likely there was a bard school in this area. There may have been many, and we know that more recently there has been hedge schools. So it's interesting that that scholarly learning is strong in the area and is perhaps strong today. And I just find another little piece that I loved in this article. Here, if you just bear with me now 1 second. So he just talks briefly about the two poets here. Again, there's so much great information in this that we don't have time to go into today. Avery and Aindrias Stack wrote poems and other material for their patrons, the MacDonalds of Kilkee and the O'Briens of Ennistymon. Such literary activities echoed that of their forebears' professional role. So again, as we said, may have been handed down. Aindrias Stack's life and works have been detailed at length elsewhere. Suffice to say that Aindrias was born at Moyglass near Milltown, Melby, where he worked as a teacher and a scribe. His poems are testament to the classical, genealogical and historical tradition which Clan Clutin had access to even at this comparatively late date. So again, it might have been dying out at this point and perhaps died out in other parts of the country, but continued to flourish around here. Details of the genealogy of the Dalgash families in a manner suggests that he had access to the full traditional genealogical tracks. So it was something that was handed down to them. And in those days, it's like, you know, sometimes you see in films or TV where a king will call for his jester or call for his fiddler's three or call for a bard to come in with a harp or a lyre. And then like that, these bards they would write laws or stories. So if something happened, it had to be written in verse. If a law was passed, it might have to be put in verse and then maybe written into stone. So that's why the bardic rule and the bardic tradition was so important in the Brehon law. And finally, we're just going to say that it's amazing that the tradition continues on here today. Behind me here, Banner Books. Great bookshop specialising in local history and has a variety of local books from local writers as well as all kinds of fiction and non-fiction. I'm here now at the top of the town in Ennistymon, just outside the Protestant church. This is Brian Merriman, one of the greatest poets of his time. So, Brian Merriman, born here in Ennistymon in 1747, is most widely known for Curchan Vania, the Midnight Court. And the copy I have here is Curchan Vania, translated by David Marcus, which is the translation that a lot of people around here would use. And I'm just going to read the start of it, if we can find it now. There we go. And what you'll get from this is the rhythm of it. Okay. The first part in which, so as I said, Merriman was born here in Ennistymon, but I think he wrote this over in northeast Clare, around near Fecal to Lochraney, I think. So the first part in which the poet is savouring the pleasures of the great outdoors. Right. Beside the water I often walk, through fields where the dew is thick as chalk, with the woods and the mountains just in sight. I hang around for the dawn to light. Lochraney lifts my soul with joy. Such land, such country, what a joy. How silently the mountains rest, their heads upon each other's breast. To view, this view would bring the heart to life, be it torn with sickness, age or strife. In the poorest beggar that ever stood, were he but to glance beyond the wood, at the fleet of ducks, when the mist has gone, conveyed by just a single swan, and the jumping fish that shoot and flash, hop in the air with a rainbow splash. The blue of the lake and the breakers roar, tossing and tumbling towards the shore. Birds on the branch that whistle and sing, frolicking fawns that soar and spring. The sound of the horn and the glimpse of the hunt, with the pack in the chase and the fox in front. So you can see it has that great rhythm, which is probably one of the reasons why it's still being performed today. Sean Turtle up in the Burn does a version of it. Jerry Howard over in Fenor has a version of it. There's lots of people around that still do it, indeed all over the world. So it's a fascinating piece. In fact, W.B. Yeats has written, or has said apparently in 1926, "Yet I could wish that a Gaelic scholar had been found, or failing that some man of known sobriety of manner and of mind, to introduce the Irish reading public this vital, extravagant, immoral, preposterous poem." Because Curchan Vania, it's about the battle of the sexes. I think it's where a man is put on trial by the women, and it talks so much about the difference between man and women and sex before marriage, sex after marriage, all these things. And it really plays with all those themes, which is amazing for something that was written in probably the late 1700s. You know, before Raftery Filla, before the famine, and yet at a time when Ireland was a really changing place. So you could see what has that kind of slightly rebellious, sexual, rhythmic nature. A piece that will not be forgotten anytime soon by Brian Merriman and Ennistymon man, Curtin Van Ihe. Okay, Sinead, Gurabila, thanks so much to Clare County Arts Office and everyone who's helped in any way with this piece. Colin Hayes, Luke McInerney, Grace Wells, Enda Hearn for the song, and everyone else who gave information and helped us with this piece about the stories and scribes of Ennistymon and surrounding areas. And like I said already, we're only scratching the surface. There's so much more out there. Ballads, hip-hop artists, poets, even right here, right now, I'm sure there's people out there writing poems and stories of all kinds. So thank yourselves for watching this far into the video. Agus fekamajurí shible khunajay, iwagi, kurmilwagi.
I'm no poet, I've no pen, but my story I'll relate concerning my childhood. Sure I know it's my fate. In a town, in a valley, I was brought up with care. Ennistymon on the Aina on the west coast.